I'm Algenon Cash, and you're locked in. Welcome back to another important conversation. Today, we are diving deep into the national and state economy with Dr. Jeff Sarbaum, senior economist at UNCG, right here in the Triad area. From headlines about interest rates and weak job reports to the surprising dismissal of the Bureau of Labor Statistics Commissioner, it's clear we're entering uncharted economic waters. And to that, the looming uncertainty of global tariffs, and many Americans are left asking, what's really going on? Dr. Sarbaum joins us to offer clarity, context, and perspective on the forces shaping our economic outlook, both here in North Carolina and across the country. Whether you're a business owner, worker, policymaker, or concerned citizen, this is a conversation you don't want to miss. And Dr. Sarbaum, welcome back, man. Thank you for locking in again.
Yeah, you're absolutely welcome. It was great to be here last time, and I'm looking forward to chatting again.
Well, you brought a bunch of news with you. So we've got a lot to try to unpack in about 30 minutes here. I think really just to get started, I think so many people, including myself, I like to say that I'm pretty smart and intelligent when it comes to the economy. But even recently, I've been scratching my head to what's going on, and I think a lot of people are scratching their head. So let's just start there. Generally, how do you feel about the U.S. economy? What are you seeing?
I mean, I think the name of the game right now is uncertainty because we don't know how the tariffs are going to play out that were just imposed on August 1st. We don't know what's going to happen with interest rates. There's tremendous pressure being put on the Fed to lower interest rates. At the same time, the Fed is feeling, like their hands, I think, are somewhat tied in the sense that there's uncertainty about what's going to happen to prices with these tariffs on, the last consumer price index that came out suggested that prices had gone up by 0.3%, which was a reversal in the trend that we had been seeing and something that economists had been predicting. I think last time I was on the show, I had said on, expect in 4 to 6 weeks perhaps to see prices starting to rise on. I think I was wrong on that, but I think I was wrong on the timing, not necessarily wrong on the ultimate impact on. I think we saw GDP grow in the second quarter by 3%, which is always an encouraging sign. But there's some concern that a lot of that growth might have been dictated by a rush to get imports in under the tariff rate. So you have a massive sort of surge in supply coming into the ports to beat the tax rates and that increase in supply is obviously going to keep pressure on prices to be low, or at least keep them from rising. And so the real question is going to be what happens next as we start to approach the the holiday purchasing season for retail outlets. This is sort of the sort of end of the line as far as making those orders for the holiday season. And so, we'll see what happens with prices as we move forward there. Certainly, the jobs report that just came out is not encouraging. The 73,000 was far below the 102,000 that had been predicted. But even more, I think, surprising than that was the revision downward of the previous 2 months. And we're talking about, revisions downward of upwards of 100,000 jobs. And so that resulted in the firing of the Bureau of Labor Statistics chief. And, that's a pretty surprising move, to put it neutrally.
Well, you said a lot there in your opening comments. So let's go back. You did something that a lot of humans struggle to do, which you said I was wrong in terms of in terms of when prices were going to go up. Not that they obviously we do see a little bit of inflationary pressure, but
Yeah.
I don't think you were the only one. I think I was wrong. I think a number of economists were wrong in terms of anticipating prices to rise a little bit faster. for some of us that are trying to figure this out, I'm not an economist, I'm more of a financier, but why were we wrong? What caused us to be wrong?
Right. I mean, I think part of it is there's been so much uncertainty in terms of, the conversation about tariffs going up and then the tariffs being walked back a little bit. And I think we really didn't sort of see the full brunt of the tariff hike until just over this weekend. And until then, it's kind of been this back and forth of what's going to happen. With some tariff rates being risen prior to this. But I think part of what's been going on in terms of the pricing is that companies have been a little bit reticent to raise prices with the uncertainty for fear of losing market share. And so I think there's been a willingness to absorb some of the costs in the name of market share, at least in the short run. I don't see that continuing on. You listen to the news reports and things of small businesses and what they're looking at now that these tariffs are officially in place. And there's a lot of nervousness out there about the kind of things they're going to have to do in relation to raising price.
Obviously the report we got from the BLS, I think that is what helped a lot of us, maybe including yourself, to see that maybe the economy was a bit weaker than we all have been thinking. And
Yeah.
shortly before we got that report, the Federal Reserve decided to hold interest rates steady,
Mhm.
citing the fact that they thought structurally the economy seemed to be more on solid footing than and not needing a rate cut. I try to remind folks, contrary to popular belief, when the feds are cutting rates, that means the economy is weak. It's not something we actually want to see. But when they're
Right.
leaving rates steady, that's actually an indication that the economy is strong. Do you think if the BLS report would have came out before the FOMC meeting, do you think maybe we would have gotten a rate cut?
I haven't thought about that question, and it's a very good question. And I think, crystal ball wise, I think it really would have been a coin flip. I think the Fed is quite concerned about rising prices heading into the holiday shopping season that will be upon us, before we know it. The Fed has a decision to make again in September. I would think that they're probably leaning more toward a rate cut than previously. When they signaled that they weren't cutting rates at their last meeting, there was somewhat of a signal that the rates wouldn't be cut again in September. Or at least that's maybe how some economists were reading the tea leaves, is that they were going to hold steady one more time to see what happens. I think that is probably what's on the table now, is a revisiting of the September decision. But I can't tell me what the crystal ball says.
Yeah, and there's a lot of time in between now and September. I think we
Sure.
even get maybe a CPI report before September, and maybe
Yeah.
even another jobs report before September
Yeah.
as well. So I guess that'll tell us. You highlight the revisions in the jobs report that actually I guess ended up costing the BLS chief her job. Two questions there. What do you think the softness in the numbers is trying to indicate to us? And, is the president right? I mean, why would we have these big, large revisions going back over 2 months ago? I guess maybe help me in the audience to understand the process by which they go through to produce these reports.
Sure. I mean, the initial job reports numbers are just estimates, and then they get revised when a lot of additional data comes in the following months. And so they don't have a lot of the jobs information when they make these initial estimates. Historically, they've been pretty good at being able to make estimates based on the information that's coming in. There is so much upheaval and uncertainty in the economy right now that it's not unreasonable for the numbers to be further off in terms of not exactly knowing what's going to be coming in when you do the revisions. You've got all of this change in employment in the federal government that is not necessarily related to job growth. And so when those figures come in, perhaps after the fact, then you get downward revisions.
Yeah, and it really feels like maybe the president made that decision for political reasons because the report didn't say what the president wanted to say. As an economist going forward, I mean, Dr. Sarbaum, is there any concern about starting to trust the data coming out of Washington? I mean, that's not a conversation that we've, at least in my lifetime, I don't recall us having a conversation about whether or not we can trust the numbers. But are we sort of on that particular? Are we on that slippery slope?
I mean, I would say we're on that slippery slope and or that edge of a cliff, and we've already taken one step over it by firing the BLS chief. And if we can't have confidence in the economic data that is being provided to us, it is going to make it nearly impossible for businesses to make efficient decisions in relation to hiring, in relation to production. It is a keystone of economic growth to have accurate data about what's happening in the economy. And I think economists around the world were pretty shocked by the firing. This is an individual who is working with models and just providing the information that those models spit out about jobs numbers, and reporting the data. Um, you know, to suggest something nefarious is happening at the BLS is something that I would have a very, very, very hard time believing.
Well, and I guess the concern is that, I mean, whoever replaces this person, do they have some kind of incentive to? I've always said that, I've worked with numbers for 20 something years, and especially in finance, I've always said you can sort of make numbers look however you want them to make, depending on
Right.
how you model them. And it's so important to have access to good, accurate data because these things can be skewed so easily by taking this out or adding this in or changing the way you measure a certain variable. And it's terrifying to know that whoever replaces this lady who's going into the BLS, that maybe they feel like they have some hidden incentive to make the numbers look good for the boss. I mean, do you think we'll see some kind of an emergence of just independent economists maybe taking on the role of helping us understand what's really going on with our economy? I mean, I know you already see that now to some degree with think tanks and that type of thing, but all of us in the industry, all of us in finance and in the markets and in business, we typically look to the federal government to give us those right numbers.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, the federal government is the largest generator of the data that economists use, and so we rely on that. And if that data is not accurate, there's no way for us to make predictions, and there's no way for us to assess what the health of the economy actually is. And that's very problematic. I don't have any problem whatsoever with people taking factual data and coming up with different stories behind what that data is telling us. I mean, that's just normative sort of analysis of people having different opinions about what things mean. But, when you start tinkering with the actual generation of the data itself, that's hugely problematic.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I was floored on Friday. I think myself and even some senators and congressmen and women who haven't been asking questions the last several months also started asking questions over the weekend. But when you were here last time, you talked extensively about stagflation,
Mhm.
Has that sentiment changed in the last several months since you were last here? Do you still see the potential for stagflation in the next 6 to 12 months?
I mean, I would have said, you know, things look like they were doing better than maybe I would have initially imagined. But I would probably take that statement back as a result of Friday. On the jobs numbers suggest the economy is slowing down. The rising inflation report suggests prices are going up. You combine those two things, and that's the classic definition of stagflation. And so, we have now seen real data that we are on a path that could be one of rising unemployment and rising prices, which is the definition of stagflation.
Dr. Sarbaum, you're here in Greensboro, North Carolina, and bringing things a little bit closer to home now. I know you're always talking to business owners and different corporate leaders here in our backyard. Outside of what we might see happening at the federal or the national macro level, talk a little bit about what you're seeing here in the state of North Carolina. What are you hearing from businesses right here in the Triad?
I mean, honestly, I've been on sort of my summer period right now doing research, so I've been kind of holed up in an office and not doing a lot of conversational outreach that I would normally do during the regular academic year. But my general sense would be that North Carolina is probably in pretty good shape as far as one of the states in the U.S. economy. I mean, we are experiencing tremendous population growth in the Triangle area. We've experienced some good investment opportunities by some tech manufacturing in the Triad region. And so, I would think North Carolina is in a much better position to weather whatever situation may or may not be coming than some of the other states.
And with some of the challenges that you and I've talked about over the last several months, some of the things happening at a macro level or even at a global level with some of the interaction with our trading partners, do you see any specific risk to North Carolina businesses or even to Triad based companies?
Um, I mean, no more so or less than the risks I think we see across the nation. North Carolina has, pivoted to some degree, I think, away from manufacturing more toward financial services in places like Charlotte, more toward tech and pharma and things in Research Triangle area. And those sorts of industry, I think, are likely to be, more immune from some of the tariff kinds of things if it really goes south on us.
Yeah, and see, I've been trying to keep an eye on our port system and just
Mm-hmm.
curious if some of what's happening at an international tariff level is starting to impact any of the container traffic coming actually into North Carolina. I actually had Jake Cashin from the North Carolina Chamber on a few weeks ago, and we were having that same conversation. But I mean, it does appear that North Carolina, I mean, because of some of its resiliency and some of the variables that were already in place, and just the fact that we're growing so fast, we seem to be powering through all this in spite of what's happening in Washington, not necessarily because of it. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. In spite of, yeah.
when you look at some of the quote unquote trade deals getting done, what's your reaction to some of that? I mean, it looks like on average, when I'm looking at some of these deals that are coming in, it looks like on average we're structuring tariff rates in between 15 and maybe 20% or so. I know for some many people they think that's a great thing because it's not the 30-50% that was talked about back in April. But I think when you still look at where average tariff rates were historically, right around 2 or 3%, I mean, this is a significant increase to go to 15 or 20%, depending on what country you are.
Yeah, it's a very significant increase. It's a massive tax on the American consumer. because the American consumer will ultimately be the one that bears the costs of these tariffs. And I do think, like you mentioned, that, we need to be careful, with this sort of sigh of relief, because it really shouldn't necessarily be a sigh of relief. I mean, we're talking about, a 5x potential hike in tariff rates compared to where historical averages had been. And so, it's not as though we are coming back from having, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50, 150% tariffs or whatever these numbers being thrown out there are. When you really drill down into it, we've doubled or more tariff rates relative to where we were in the fairly recent past. And that is very disrupting to the global economy and to global supply chains. And, there's a reason certain products are produced in certain countries, and it's because they can be produced cheaper there. And that results in lower costs for American consumers.
Yeah, and I don't know. I the deals themselves don't even appear to be that good. I guess if you can call them deals. I mean, most of these things have not been structured around a true trade agreement that's approved by Congress and, goes through all the normal channels that a trade agreement should. But I mean, the deals themselves don't look that great. I mean, we pay, or we're going to pay a 15% tariff on goods coming into our country, but then that same country, they're not there. It's a 0% rate for our stuff going into their country. Now I know from our end, it sounds like that's good because we're talking about all this money that's going to be generated, but I think all that money is going to come from American consumers. So it's almost like we're paying a tax, and then the trading partner that we're working with, their consumers aren't paying a tax. Am I looking at that correctly, or?
I, I think so. Yeah. I mean, the ability for the United States to sell exports to the rest of the world without incurring, high taxes is not necessarily a bad thing from the perspective of export job creation in the United States. And if anything, having low tariffs is what should be the name of the game for everybody for the most global economic growth and success. Um, in terms of the the tariffs that are being imposed on imports, those are a direct tax on U.S. Well, not a direct tax, but they're an indirect tax on U.S. consumers. And I think there's been a lot of language about how the tariffs are not resulting in higher prices for consumers, and we talked about that a little bit earlier in the show as to why that may or may not be the case in terms of companies trying to just hold the line until they know what's exactly unfolding. But right now, I think the signals you're getting from some of the executives out there is that they are kind of reaching the end of the line in terms of trying to keep prices down, and that their margins are getting stretched to the point that it's either going to be raise prices or you know uh, or some other alternative, which could result in job losses, etc.
Yeah, and I just think the recent jobs report we got, along with the revisions, I think that clearly speaks to the fact that companies have been pulling back, and
Yeah,
they may not be raising prices at the rate that we thought, but it's pretty clear that they're not making certain investments, and they're not expanding, and everybody seems to be on hold because of all the uncertainty that's caught up in the market. Which really shocks me because if you would have told me a few months ago that the stock market would still be hitting record highs, I just wouldn't have understood how that's possible. But it's almost as if market players or market participants are just ignoring all these things that are going on around us. I just it doesn't quite make the most sense to me. I guess, Dr. Sarbaum, as we get ready to wrap up, it always goes faster than we thought, but any just practical advice to business owners, small business owners specifically, as we get ready to go into the second half of this uncertain year?
I mean, just keep doing what you're doing, focus on your goals, focus on your mission, focus on your strategy. You can't control what you can't control, so control and navigate what you can. Be very, very flexible, be careful about what's happening to your production costs, and pay attention to how your product and your market responds to price hikes, because if that's something that your industry is going to be faced with due to rising production costs, then you want to be the first out of the gate to strategize how you're going to respond to those things.
Dr. Sarbaum, real quick, you mentioned production costs. I mean, as it relates to some of what's been going on this year, some of the things we've been watching since April, have you actually heard of any companies? Have you talked to any companies that are moving production back to the United States or moving production back to North Carolina as a result of this strict tariff policy?
I mean, you certainly have heard, commentary of companies considering relocating to the United States. I mean, the idea that Apple is going to produce phones in the United States to me is just a non-starter. But I can't think of any examples right off the top of my head, but I know, at least sort of perusing the media and things, there are some stories of companies that have come, back to the US soil. But again, when you're doing that, you're moving away from uh, the most efficient way of producing a product to a slightly more efficient, less efficient way of producing a product. And there are alternative, more efficient ways to go about promoting job creation in an economy than interfering with what the global economy naturally wants to do, which is create a supply chain that results in the highest level of economic growth for the globe.
No, I think you're right. Dr. Sahlbaum, as always, man, I appreciate you being here
Absolutely.
and thank you for breaking this all down for us. Your insights help cut through the noise and give us the clarity we need in times of economic complexity. As always, to our listeners, if you found value in today's conversation, please consider supporting my work. Your donations help us bring thoughtful discussions like this one to life, amplify voices that matter, and keep important topics front and center in our triad region. You can always contribute at my Patreon link. Every dollar helps us do more. And as always, until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and as always, stay locked in.